Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the conference. Today's track aims to capture the history of different paradigms of development communication and engage in empirical discussions to review the strategies in the age of new media. It shifts the focus to the role of culture in development partnerships. This track is chaired by Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh. She was a permanent representative to UNESCO in Paris and the UN offices in Geneva. She was nominated by the Ministry of External Affairs as member of the Task Force on Non-Proliferation and Disarmament and participated in the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty (CTBT) negotiations at the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. The other distinguished speakers in this track are Mr. Pawan Verma, Cultural Advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar, Dr. Bakhtiar Amin, former Human Rights Minister, Iraq, Mr. Jawahar Sirkar, CEO, Prasar Bharati, Mr. Siddharth Vardarajan, former editor, The Hindu, and Dr. Dilip Padgaonkar, R.K. Lakshman Chair Professor, Symbiosis International University. I request the chairperson to kindly take over the session. Thank you.
Yeah, and ma'am, you can, there's a mic there also.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And it's been a very exciting start to our day today, and I hope that the discussions on the panel will add to the excitement. I'm not going to take up too much time because we're running a little late and we're a little short of time. But what we have been asked to discuss in this panel is the role of culture in development partnerships. Now, this is not discussing culture in the abstract, but a specific role. And I would like to request the panelists, if possible, to look at least three levels of this soft power that we are talking about. I don't particularly like the idea of power because power is a means of persuasion. But persuasion is all right, I suppose, if it's soft. And you can try and bring people around to your point of view, provided, I believe, you are prepared to also accept the other point of view. That is an important part. So these three levels, if one could look at it, one is the projection of your power, your cultural power, within which your development activities, your projects are embedded. The people-to-people contact, which is the acceptance or the receptivity to the culture of the host country, to be able to interact much more. And of course, in both of these, and you will see from our very distinguished panel, that most of them, if not all of them, are from or experts in the media, is the issue of communication. Is how do you communicate to your hosts, and how do your hosts communicate back to you so that whatever development projects that you are undertaking are beneficial to both the hosts and the guests. I'm not going to start philosophizing on the issue of culture, but I would like to say that it is a much misused word. The issue of culture, I had a young faculty member of this amazing university who's been attached to me, asking me whether cultures did not, in fact, promote conflict. This is something which we would have to think about when cultures clash, as they would in a development partnership, would it automatically, is it in our genes that this might provoke conflict rather than what is the end state which is wished for, which is understanding? So the effort will have to be conscious to see that the clash of the cultures do not create results which conflict with the objectives of your development partnerships. So I've kept development partnerships very much in focus in what I have said. And without further ado, let me introduce this really very distinguished panel that we have here. We have Dr. Bakhtiar.
I'm supposed to speak about cultural developments in my country and our relationship with Asia, and I am going to focus on India because the subject is very broad. So I will talk about our culture and our relations with your beautiful country. The concepts of the creation of our world, our mythologies, folk tales, folklores, epics, oral stories, literature, religions, and later the archaeological and heritage sites, buildings are among the most important founding stones of any culture. If the language of any people is the spine of any people, its culture is its soul. Mesopotamia, the country of the two rivers Tigris and Euphrates, is considered and agreed upon by many historians, archaeologists, and academics to be the cradle of civilizations. I will humbly try in this brief presentation to shed light about thousands of years of the foundations of our history, culture, and our most important national treasures and heritage, which represents the identity of the Iraqi people's civilization, and that's directly related to the rise of our civilization throughout the ages, which played an effective role in the human civilization as a whole. Mesopotamia has played an essential role in placing the first building block of human civilization. Our country is the land of the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Medes. It's the land of Ur, Babylon, Hatra, Nimrud, Nineveh, Chiacharmo, first agricultural village in mankind's history where cereals were cultivated, Shanadar and Hazarmert, caves of first Neanderthals, of Ashur, and the first musical instrument of the Sumerian era, harp, the first writings of the Mismar writings, the first laws known as Hammurabi legislation rose on the land of Babylon during the rule of the great Babylonian king Hammurabi, who lived 1750 to 1792 before BC. The Babylonians are also credited with mathematical sciences, algebra, engineering, and the invention of the decimal and sexadecimal system, as well as directing sites on the number 60 that can be divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20, 30. This is why it was important in calculating calendars for months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. The Iraqi invented the wheel that is credited along with the decimal and sexadecimal system in developing and presenting land, marine, air, and space communication. The facts say that the Assyrians and before them, the Babylonians and the Akkadians are credited with astronomy. The Assyrians monitored the first solar eclipse in Ashur, city on 15th of June 706, as well as the rule of kings and historic incidents. This is a little of what ancient Iraqis achieved. In a later In a later stage, the Kurdish musician Ziryab contributed to the creation of first musical conservatory in Cordoba in Europe. Mesopotamia is centrally located among the ancient religions in history such as Zoroastrianism, Manism, Mazdaism, and Yazidism, along with other religions with different forms of worship, including the worship of the sun, fire, and other natural phenomena. And the three religions, Judaism, historic heritage sites for humanity. Today, the sites of prophets Ezra in Azer area north of Basra, Daniel in Kirkuk, Yunus and Sheet in Mosul, and Noam in Al-Kush, etc., are in urgent need of protection. A part of these sites and graves in Iraq are in good condition. They are sites for worship, tourism, and visit. People go to them to make requests and wishes for marriage, fertility, and pregnancy, recovery from illness, etc. All the archaeological sites in Iraq have suffered the effects of time, weather, dictatorship, and negligence, in addition to pillaging, theft, and terrorism. They continue to suffer ongoing threats to this day. As a result of the violence and the difficult humanitarian situation in the country, the archaeological sites in Iraq have become a haven and shelter for the displaced persons. Examples of these sites include Deir Matti, San Mateo, in addition to many illegal homes built on archaeological sites without permits. Tak Kisra of Salman Pak, south of Baghdad, the Kildani Church in Kirkuk, Fort, a number of other archaeological monuments, buildings, and homes do not need primitive rebuilding, but rather important and serious measures and financial allocations. The problems plaguing the Iraqi heritage and archaeology are immense and cannot be resolved simply with rebuilding and maintenance of all sites, with neglecting the problems of the citizens. The federal government and local governments should work on activating these sites as part of the process of rebuilding Iraq as a whole, economically and psychologically. Iraq must look after its history, archaeology, and heritage, as well as the reputation of its rich civilization through the best modern techniques and scientific methods, as well as in-depth studies, excavation, and research by Iraqis and others. And we hope that the others, including India and the rest of the world, can also assist Iraq in rebuilding and maintaining its heritage and its archaeology. The treasures and archaeological sites of Iraq should be highlighted for the Iraqis and humanity as a whole. While we thank all recent efforts that maintained and still maintain this rich heritage, we condemn all those who sabotage and destroy the archaeological and heritage of Iraq. Ladies and gentlemen, as you might well know, Iraq is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society composed of a majority Arab population, with a Shia majority and a Sunni minority. Kurds with a Sunni majority, a Shia minority. Yazidi Kurds, which is an ancient religion, which is an amalgam of Sanskritism with Zoroastrianism. Kakais, Shabak, Turkomen, both Shia and Sunni, Assyro-Chaldeans, Syriac, Christians, Armenians, Mandayans, major religions, orders, and Qadri, Naqshbandis, with strong Indian influences, as well as smaller orders as Sufis, Rifais, Saris. These mosaic of ethnicities, religions, and sects have created diverse cultures and cultural manifestations and practices. Iraq's creation as a nation-state is recent in history, going back to the aftermath of the First World War, through amalgamating three Ottoman provinces of Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra. It was declared as a state in 1921 under the British occupation and recognized by the League of Nations in 1932 in condition to recognize the local languages and cultures of the country. By this, they meant an autonomy to the Kurds, who were not in their history a part of any Arab countries. Kurds in this way remained as a largest ethnic group in the world without a state of their own. Today, they are about 40 million people living in Kurdistan, divided between Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria, and former Soviet republics. Kurds are an Indo-European people with a distinct language, culture, geography, history, and identity, and they have been submitted to systematic cultural destruction and prohibition of their language and cultural manifestation in their country. The major problem in our region is the mismanagement and the lack of management or embracement of diversity, which is behind of most of our disputes and problems in our region. You are a great example of embracing the diversity in your region. And we have a lot to learn from your wonderful example, despite all your difficulties. But in our situation, we are in a terrible situation of violence, wars, and conflicts in our region. We are 7% of world's population in the Middle East, representing about 40% of world's violence, and 90% of our violence is due to to the mismanagement of ethnic and cultural diversity. Given the short time that we have, so I'm concluding here by thanking all of you and saying that India actually has created a joint commission and signed 4 bilateral memorandum of understandings in various fields of and sector, gas, oil, and health, education. We have about 10,000 Iraqi students, 800 here in Pune. We have about 15,000 Indians who are working in Kurdish area. We are buying about for $20 billion oil from Iraq. We are number 2 exporter of oil to your country after Saudi Arabia, even before Iran. And we have about 35,000 Iraqis who are getting visa to visit your country, and you have also Indians who are coming to visit our holy shrines in Karbala, in Najaf, and we hope to these kind of meetings to promote further enhancing our relationship and our cultural exchange. The Indian film industry is known to us, and it has influenced a lot of us, I mean, since our childhood, from Dara Singh to all others. And thank you indeed, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramin. That was extremely interesting. Can I now request Ambassador Pavan Verma, the cultural advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar, to give us his views on the subject.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Ghosh. I'm extremely happy to be at Symbiosis to discuss a broader theme of development partnerships, and I'm especially happy that the focus is on Asia and Africa. On the subject before us today, I want to begin by saying that the 21st century in particular has a certain efficiency in stating what they believe to be our absolute truths. It was stated some time ago that soft power, this expression, and culture are aspects which promote the ability of countries to interact with each other more comprehensively, more affectionately, more closely, and at a broad level this can't be questioned. But today, now that we are discussing in this beautiful campus this issue, I want to interrogate it. We need to interrogate concepts because you cannot take them as axiomatic. When you speak of culture as a facilitating mechanism in the seamless web of diplomacy, do you have the product? As far as India is concerned, this is a civilization of antiquity, of continuity, of diversity, of assimilation, of peaks of refinement. It's a 5,000-year civilization. And that evidence of a past product is with us. After all, if 600 years before the birth of Christ, a man called Bharat could write a treatise called the Natya Shastra, which is 6,000 Sanskrit shlokas, not as a compendium of the arts, but a meditation on what constitutes aesthetics, rasa. If you could have the kind of lofty projections in philosophy of the Vedas and the Upanishads, if you could have a university called Nalanda, which ran for 7, 8 centuries and was the Harvard of Asia, if you could have in the field of politics the first political treatise written anywhere in the world, Chanakya's Arthashastra, if you could have even in the field of desire, Vatsyayan's Kama Sutra, again probably one of the first in the world. If you could have Panini, who wrote the Ashtadhyayi 400 years before the birth of Christ, until the last 2 centuries it was said to be the most comprehensive and scientific lexicon on grammar. If you could build a temple at Kailash, not far from here, which had the audacity to build a temple to precise geometrical symmetry by carving an entire mountain from top down, 200,000 tons of stone excavated. And if you could, with the coming of Islam, also develop a syncretic culture which allowed people of communities and religions to meld together in what is called the Ganga Jamuni culture, to allow the Sufi tradition, to allow Amir Khusro, the amalgamation of, then as the minister said, together we have a product. In the field of music, in the field of dance, in the field of literature with Kalidas, in every respect you have a product. That product then becomes an important aspect in cementing relationships with countries because it is born out of an inherent and intrinsic strength, not as coercion, but one that allows you to communicate with each other on the basis of the credentials of being rooted in a strongly evolved culture. And that is why I don't think there are many examples in history where, for instance, in Asia, you had the export or the interaction of Indian culture for as much as a millennia and more, starting from 600 years before Christ to right up to the 11th century AD, the Pali text which took Buddhism out of India. And then through the 2nd century AD, through the Amravati period, through the Pala, Pallava, Chola, Gupta period, right up, and you can see that influence entirely sans military conquest on the basis of equality and respect between India and Asia certainly, and in Africa more peripherally. But it was there. I mean, the world's largest Hindu temple, and I say Hindu as a metaphor because it symbolizes a certain cultural tradition. The world's largest temple is in Angkor Wat, not in India. Even today in central Vietnam, you had the Champa dynasty which ruled for 1,000 years where the language was Sanskrit. In Borobudur, in Indonesia, what a magnificent example of the interaction of cultures, of learning from them and learning. I mean, in Thailand, if you go, while it's largely a Buddhist country, the names are so Sanskritized of the roads, of the places. So there was this great interaction, and because we had the product. Now, we must come to today. And I am going to raise this query because seminars are not only about making speeches, they are about provoking some antibodies in the system. I want to ask you, what is the product we have today? Yes, it is the past laurels, but today, as the world's largest democracy, I am afraid there are many, many ways in which Indian culture is itself becoming derivative. And I will dwell in the last 2 minutes on why this poses a problem in a world where people are competing for cultural space as an instrument of diplomacy. So today when you look at our culture, I am afraid the subtext of globalization in the field of culture is co-option, and India is demonstrating many aspects of this to become a derivative culture. The only thing India cannot become is a derivative culture. I don't have the time, but I'm going to give you some examples, especially of the elite middle class and the whole urban sprawl of India. Recently in Delhi, I asked a group of students who were from one of the best schools in Delhi to give me a line-by-line translation of the national anthem. They could not. On another occasion, I walked into a shop. I have nothing against that particular custom. It was Valentine's Day, very sweet custom actually. And I asked the students who were now being the repositories of somebody else's culture and taking it, but no problem in that. Culture is about equal interaction. But culture must also be about confident dialogue between two well culturally rooted interlocutors. So I asked them, what do you know? Well, discussion, they recognized me. I said, what do you know about the story of Laila Majnu, of Soni Mahiwal? I said, do you know who was Vatsyayan? Who wrote the Kama Sutra? And the answer was a bewilderment. I was told I'm giving these snapshots because we don't have time. I've written a whole book called Becoming Indian on this. I mean, there is something wrong if you want to be a cultural powerhouse complementing the other instruments of diplomacy. If, for instance, in New Delhi, in most schools, especially the best among them, most young children know Shakespeare but have never read Kalidas. There's something wrong. The chief of bureau of the Financial Times came to me some time ago and he said that, my wife and I, she's also a journalist here, are invited to be the chief guests at school functions. And when we go there, he asked me in true bewilderment. He said, when we go there, we find so many of the children, their fancy dress is noddy. So they asked me, but you have Panchatantra, this greatly rich text of folk stories, of children's stories, replete with symbolism and meaning. What has happened to you? So I am giving you these examples because I feel we need to interrogate this very carefully. I mean, Shah Rukh Khan and chicken tikka cannot be the calling chords of soft power universally across the globe. There has to be more. There has to be more, and we need to, as Indians, and especially with regions with whom we have had the most amazing relationship over the centuries, Asia and Africa, who speak cultures we respect, can we give to them and learn from them something which we also are proud of as far as we are concerned? I mean, there is a derivativeness that is coming, and I want to sound a note of warning on that, because you must have a product to sell. You don't have a product to sell, then you are improvising, which is not good enough for a 5,000-year-old civilization. And lastly, the last 2 minutes I'll take, is that culture, even if the product was good or can be improved or is given greater substance, needs a certain machinery for propagation. Today, you need, I have been Director General ICCR, I was Director Nehru Center in London. You need resources, you need the planning, you need the prioritization in the worldview of the Foreign Office of the government of providing to culture that kind of space, and you need the packaging. And above all, you have to be conscious of the competition. If the annual budget of BBC is some 20 times more than the entire budget of the ICCR of India, or if the Goethe Institute, or of what China is spending on culture, or what other countries are beginning to realize that they should be spending, and we remain moribund. You may have the best culture, but how do you reach it? So you have to see culture not as some obtuse definition, but as something living, something that needs to be enriched, and in order for it to play a role in diplomacy, something that also needs the planning and resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Verma. That is very interesting. I now would request Mr. Jawahar Sarkar, the CEO of Prasar Bharati, to give us his views.
Good morning. Speaking after Pawan is a problem. Speaking with him often gets to be a problem. Now, I have this genetic urge to take on every sentence that he has said and contest them, but I would refrain from such exercises early in the morning. We have been in culture together, and I think the only point on which we agree is the other guy is highly overrated. Now, having said that, he has actually said a lot of sense today, I'm serious about it. We have served in culture together, his with a lot of international, let us say, exposure, and mine more grounded to the realities of managing prima donnas. Now, I have this only single point on soft culture, which is on which we agree again, and the costs and priorities products that he mentioned, except that at the end of it, I find a lot of ludicrous findings. The fact that I have a hamburger doesn't make me pro-American. The fact that somebody has chicken tikka doesn't make him pro-Indian. In fact, it was quite a revelation to know that the ISI terrorists had been watching seductive Indian dances before planting their bombs, which meant that it made absolutely no effect where these things are concerned. But then this is not the forum. I'll stick to my part of the topic because we are running short of time. Prasar Bharati is India's public service broadcast, and the fact that you've never heard its name before speaks wonders. It consists of Akashvani and Doordarshan, All India Radio and Doordarshan, which you've heard about. I was dragged in, or was told to come over in the wake of the Commonwealth Games scandal. I think that's just the word that we can use. A lot of equipment had been bought on high definition, but nothing was done. It was outsourced to people, and the inquiry is still on. Since the matter is sub judice, I'll let the matter rest there. Now, what do we do about it? Here's an organization that has been dried up for about 20 years without a single recruitment. Its installations trebled to 480 today, a demoralized workforce, and a non-existent leadership. We were looking for occasions where you can trigger what we call the defining moments. The Zubin Mehta concert could have been one more if NDTV had done it, but when Prasar Bharati or All India Radio or Doordarshan did it, it became a metaphor for getting out of the rut. Let me start at the beginning. It started with an innocuous lunch with the German ambassador, who mentioned about the possibility of Zubin Mehta coming to India. Good news. Bringing in the best of concerts from Bavaria. Very good news. Would I like to see it? Of course. And would we think of partnering? I said, if it's on the Indian soil, I would prefer to telecast it. He gulped. Good man. He gulped. He said, but this calls for world standards. This calls for high definition. I said, Ambassador, we have high definition. He said, I'm aware, but we have not come across a single case example where you have used it for such a large event. I said, what is the size of your event? He said, look, Mr. Sarkar, you have a 4-camera high-definition OB van. We found that out. We can't work less than 10. 10 cameras, high definition, operating simultaneously. And we'd like to help you, but would you like joining the Germans? He was completely within his rights in what he said. I was completely within my rights of imagination to refuse. Said, we will do it. And when I was saying I didn't know how we'd do it, it's like the Anish Kapoor show. First you promise, then you get it done. So when we come back, and before I could tell my boys, they had shot a letter with German efficiency, to which our organization replied in a typical Sarkari style, we don't have the capability. Finished. Again, had to retrieve the situation. The short point again, is they chose to do it in Srinagar. Srinagar is not one of the most peaceful places for these things, and this turned out to be one of the most controversial run-ups to any event in India in recent history. That, gentlemen and ladies, made it more interesting. It would get us eyeballs much more than you'd get perhaps for a concert in Bombay or Pune. The next thing was, how do you get that thing operationalized? In a typical fit of governmental imagination, the only 10-camera high-definition outdoor van was parked in Chennai, where they telecast 2 shows in a year. We dragged it back from Chennai. In the meantime, we had gone through a lot of training facilities of our boys, but nobody was willing to take the plunge. This is how government in most places of the world operate, and India can reach high standards where this is concerned. Who would press the button? In the absence of others, we had to say that, okay, we take the call. Then there was frightening notes that you don't know what you're going to do, you're going to muck it up. The Germans put up very exacting standards. Number 1, 10 HD cameras, I said 12. 20 trained staff in international HD operations, we gave them 22. And they went on taking, but this was all theoretical. You know, they had got trained, but they were like kids in a university who had never come out and done it themselves. So this was it. Then they made us sign this thing. They said their part of the deal was they would telecast it in 40 European countries, so we better be good. Better be good. We passed, and then we moved on. All along, I found much more enthusiasm in the technicians, cameramen, producers, and production executives than at the headquarters level. Let's put it like that. The advantage of it was that we would get perennial, perpetual rights over this. That's first. Very little investment, 1 crore, which we have recouped. Number 2. Number 3, we took the HD plunge that was waiting from Commonwealth days. And we came up clean with the same cameras and same equipment that are a subject of parliamentary discussion of profligacy and waste. So the jinx were over. What did we gain? Respect from the Germans and the Europeans. That, I think, is one thing. So all these theories of a culture secretary telling people how to do was now replaced by a retired man trying to do it himself. We had perpetual rights. We could bring European symphony back to India. We are a mature nation. We don't need to sort of keep away the world's best just because we are patriotic. There's a renewed interest in others' music right now at the field level. The most interesting part was that we also managed to convey the best of Indian music through Kashmiri folk music to the rest of the world as part of the bargain. That was about 30% to 70% formula. We rode on their backs. This is how culture is actually executed, talks apart. And the purpose of the public broadcaster was to help reach out to the people, a very disturbed people. So what we did was put up screens in different parts of the city, reach out through the papers, and the controversy did the rest of advertisement for us. And once we put Nielsen, AC Nielsen, one of the best in the world, they came back with a report that 64% of people in Srinagar had actually watched the show. This is by far the highest viewing anywhere in the world. So the end result is, apart from making friends with the Germans, earning the respect of the international community, piggyback riding your culture on their backs at their cost, displaying was, and you know, the standards were standards so high, 120 mics. Okay, last word on this. Was it a very smooth operation? No joint naval exercise, army exercise is ever smooth. Let you on to an official secret. During the Second World War, the Allies often fought more within themselves, as they did with outsiders. The Americans were called Yanks, the British Limeys, the French Froggies, and it went on like that. This happens. Our boys were screaming, and they were rushing to me every now and then. And the only message that I gave them was the first lesson of management. When two persons ride a horse, one must ride behind. At times we rode behind, at times they rode behind us, and together we composed it. The advantage we had was that everything was recorded. The whole show was recorded 12 times over. We could do a first-class post-production remake of the whole thing. It's part of the Indian nation's treasures now. I have kept a copy here and be available all over within 15 days, if we can believe in governmental efficiency. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarkar. And now may I request Siddharth Varadarajan to come and give us his views on culture, the role of culture in development partnerships.
Thank you very much. I will focus, since there shouldn't be any overlap, on my domain expertise, which is on the media, and essentially look at what role the Indian media has historically played and what role are we playing today to foster development and cultural partnerships, particularly with respect to India and Africa. It seems to me worthwhile, since my focus is on the media, to begin with a fundamental question, which is that as Indians, are we really interested in what is happening around the world? Or are we so preoccupied with what's happening within the country, often within our own state or city or region, and even if we are interested in international issues, is our focus almost exclusively on India's immediate neighborhood? Or is there something about the wider world which interests us, which excites us, which animates us? And the reason I ask this question is because if somebody were to land, if a Martian were to land, or somebody were to land in India and go through our papers, our newspapers, or watch our television channels, there would be few occasions. The death of Nelson Mandela was one such example, when you had live coverage across Indian channels. But there would be few occasions or times when a major world story would make it to the front pages of our newspapers. And even if it did, it would be perhaps just for a day before getting relegated inside. You will be hard-pressed to find in most of our papers anything more than 3/4 or 1 page of international news. And when I say, are Indians interested in the world around them, I believe they are, incidentally. But I don't think the Indian media does justice to them and their interest. But somebody coming from abroad and looking at Indian papers could well be forgiven for assuming that, well, maybe people aren't interested in what's happening around the world. If my belief is correct, that people here are interested. Now, what explains the lack of coverage in our newspapers and television channels? My sense is that the owners and proprietors and promoters of the Indian media simply do not wish to spend money on doing what it takes to inform people inform their readers, inform their viewers about global developments. Telling stories about what's happening in Africa, Latin America, elsewhere in the world is an expensive business. When I was editor of The Hindu, we opened a bureau, we posted a reporter to Africa. Historically, The Hindu always had somebody. There was a reporter who functioned out of Nairobi in the 50s and 60s. After South Africa became free, there was a Hindu correspondent who operated out of South Africa for about a decade. But there was, again, a long period when no Indian paper had an Africa correspondent. And we took a decision, I took the decision as editor, that Africa is too important, far too important for India to ignore in this way. And that the right sort of reporter with the right kind of editorial backing can and will produce stories that readers will find interesting and readers will want to read. But as I said, it's an expensive proposition. Even then, you're talking about an expense of anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 a month. Many media houses may be unwilling or unable to do that, but certainly the more prosperous, more successful ones, Times of India, for example, or some of the TV channels, certainly have the money, certainly have the resources to do so, but they don't do it. And apart from the unwillingness to spend money, the fact is that should an important story develop, many proprietors say, well, what's the point of sending somebody there to cover it when you have access to international wire services? You have access to New York Times or Guardian, whose syndication services most newspapers in India, most good newspapers in India subscribe to. Now the problem with this, and this comes to the heart of what we are trying to discuss here at Symbiosis over the last 2 days, is that can India hope to build durable cultural and development partnerships with a region of the world like Africa, say, when most of what it receives by way of information is filtered through Western lenses? Now, I'm not saying Indians are necessarily more enlightened or Indian reporters are more likely to ask the kind of searching questions that a Western reporter or a Western editor may not. Pavan is quite right that the Indian middle class has embraced globalization with a vengeance, and that has also reflected attitudes and approaches. But there is a sense in which it is possible still for an Indian reporter in Africa or Latin America or Asia to look at the regions that she or he is covering with a frame, with a lens that is different from that of a Western reporter, that of a Western news agency. And the baggage you carry with you impinges upon how you see and how you report. This isn't a media anecdote, but I'm reminded of a passage. There's a Sri Lankan anthropologist called Gananath Ubayasekere who wrote a book called The Apotheosis of Captain Cook. And there's a humorous episode where he discusses Captain Cook's first arrival on a Pacific island. And Captain Cook had all these stories and prejudices about how the Pacific Islanders are cannibals and engage in cannibalistic practices and so on. So when they landed and they began to have their first conversations with the natives of this island, they were all focused on trying to elicit information about anthropophagy or cannibalism. And it quickly emerged that the islanders got so terrified by this line of questioning that they fled. And it later emerged that they believed that this curiosity of Captain Cook and his colleagues about cannibalism must be a reflection of the fact that they were cannibals. And they feared getting eaten up by Captain Cook and his sailors. So the point is that you come with prejudices, you come with all kinds of assumptions that affects the sort of question you ask. So when you look at a lot of Western reporting out of Africa, say, and this is a subject that's been animating me and some other colleagues. I think Vijay Naik is here in the audience, a senior journalist who's had a long association with Africa. And at his initiative, 2.5 years ago, and with the assistance of the Ministry of External Affairs, we had a very successful India-Africa Editors Forum. We had discussions. A group of Indian and African editors got together to see what is it that what we can do to increase the amount of coverage in the Indian media about Africa and vice versa. And of course, it emerged that in the absence of people actually visiting each other over a sustained in a sustained manner, nothing much is going to change. But if you look at the tenor of Western reporting about, it's a fact that over the last decade, for example, the scale of Indian interaction with Africa has increased manifold, particularly in the economic front. You have Indian companies that are active, that are investing, that are trading in DRC, in Ethiopia, in Mozambique. I personally, during a visit, was able to meet some of these business representatives to interact with Congolese or Mozambican or Ethiopian officials to understand the kind of dynamic operating. And then you read Western accounts. Now, I'm not saying that these Indian companies that go to Africa are benevolent companies. They're there to make money, just as they make money in India, and just as if they indulge in sharp business practices in India, it's only to be assumed that should the opportunity present itself in Africa, they will indulge in sharp business practices there too. But the dominant narrative of Western coverage about the growing Indian interaction with Africa is that this is some kind of neo-colonialism. That just as, but there what they don't talk about is, so somehow the interaction of Western companies with Africa is today more benevolent. And if Indian companies are there, they're only engaging in land grab, they're only engaging in some kind of exploitation. So the attempt is to undercut and to paint in a negative light many of the development initiatives, many of the economic interactions that are currently taking place between India and Africa. So it seems to me that the only way to counter and to counter this sort of perception, and it's from time to time you see a reflection in the Indian media of this sort of narrative, and that's simply because you don't have Indian reporters, you don't have enough Indians who are visiting and writing about Africa in the Indian press or on Indian television. Cultural and development partnerships, particularly in the India-Africa context, can only flourish if there is a flow of information, if there's a knowledge base, if there is sensitivity. And this can only come about if, as I said, there is greater coverage in our media about what's happening in Africa, and to focus, like when a Western reporter goes to a country, chances are that, at least that was things are changing in the West too, but the focus would invariably be on conflict, on all the negative stories. There's very little attempt made to focus on the manner in which people in different African countries are tackling with their problems. What are the similarities? What are the differences between what's happening in India and Africa and those countries? And it's essential that you have sensitive reporting that looks at life the way it's being lived, because the fact is that we also have, in many of these countries, you have Indian communities that have settled there for a long time. You have Indians who are working in different sectors, including the development sector. There's a vast, the Indian presence is there and it's significant. And there's a large number of African students who come to India every year. So one of the ideas that we had in our editors forum was to come up with mechanisms for the sharing of information electronically, mechanisms to come up with India and Africa to collaborate on the training of journalism and the providing technical assistance when it comes to television, when it comes to broadband networks, some of these things which are very useful for modern journalism. Some of these ideas have unfortunately taken their time in being implemented. We hope later in 2014, during the next India-Africa Summit, to have the next edition of our African and Indian Editors Forum, where we can actually come up with even more, with a plan of action to actually implement some of the proposals that we came up with earlier. But I think in the absence of that, unless we are able to come up with some way of providing authentic, credible, sensitive information about what's happening in Africa to Indian readers and viewers and what's happening in India to people in Africa, I think the attempts that the government and civil society and the private sector are making to build the kind of partnerships that both Africa and India need will always run the risk of being stillborn. Thank you very much.
Finally, we have Dr. Dilip Padgaonkar. May I request him to please give us his views on the subject. Well done, sir.
Nothing is more terrifying than to be the last speaker on the panel, because all of them have said what you intended to say. So quite literally, the previous speakers have taken my words out of my own mouth. I will therefore set aside the paper I had prepared for this session and try and improvise. And the improvisation will take two forms. Probably say a couple of things which the others have not mentioned, but also, I think, to counter some of the points that have been raised this morning. I'm going to talk about the relationship between culture and politics. And I will do so by quoting a favorite media story of mine, because some of you have heard that story before, so do pardon me if I repeat it. But I think it sets the overall framework of the remarks that will follow. This is a true story. I was posted in Paris as the Times of India's correspondent in 1968. A few months earlier, the Soviet Union had invaded a tiny country in Central Europe called Czechoslovakia. I was asked by my editor to go and visit Prague and do a series of articles on what life was under Soviet occupation. My problem, of course, was that I didn't know either Czech or Slovak. So I turned to a student of the Charles University, which is the best university in that country, to help me translate shop signs, headlines of newspapers, and so on and so forth. One day over a beer, I said, look, tell me what the press in your country is like. And he said, well, sir, our newspapers contain truths, half-truths, and lies. The truths are in the sports pages. The half-truths are in the weather report columns. And the lies everywhere else. Mind you, this was a communist country, completely controlled under Soviet occupation. So this was the response. A few years later, I go back to Prague, and this time Prague, Czechoslovakia, is a very different country. It's a democracy, it's a market economy. So I ask, this time, a professor of Charles University, I said, look, this is what I was told last time. How are things today? What is the press like in Czechoslovakia now? And he said, well, sir, our newspapers still contain truths, half-truths, and lies. But since everything is sponsored, you can't tell the difference. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the ends of politics and the ends of culture are not just different, not just divergent, but very often they are in conflict one with the other. The ends of power of politics is to acquire power, retain power, end power. The ends of culture are quite different. The ends of culture are to allow creative people, writers, artists, dancers, musicians, etc., to try and raise awareness of people about realities as seen from their perspective, from the vantage point of their knowledge and of their insights. But it so happened, of course, that politics has been using culture down the centuries. It's been using culture, for example, to build huge monuments in order to assert imperial authority, colonial authority, to enhance the prestige of the emperor. It has been used to stage parades, again with a view to mobilizing opinion. And this use in the 20th century is most marked under totalitarian regimes. You had examples of communist regimes, which again have built these monumental structures. You had examples of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, where similar things happened. And the common thread in all these regimes was any kind of critical, creative, innovative cultural activity was suppressed. Intellectuals and artists were banished to exile. Many were killed. Some of those trends also appear in authoritarian regimes around the world. And even in certain democracies, you find examples of authoritarian leaders who are not at all comfortable with anyone who questions, who dissents, who doubts. Of course, even in democracies, authoritarian leaders are very fond of erecting monuments. I shall not mention names, but all of you are aware of the kind of statues that line the landscape in Uttar Pradesh and whose statues they are. I shall not also mention the name of someone who wants to erect the largest ever statue in the world. I shall not mention the name of someone else who wants to erect the statue of the same person, even larger than the largest one, in another state. The word for it is megalomania. This is to use cultural artifacts like buildings, like statues, even parks, in order to promote a certain political personality and sometimes also to promote a certain ideological or political agenda. So we've got examples, particularly in our country, the darkest period as far as the conflict between culture and politics is concerned was during the emergency, 1975-77. Nothing, but nothing was produced in that period which stood the test of time. The one film that was made, and which was called, I think it's relevant even today, the film's title was Kissa Kursi Ka, that was censored, banned. And during that period, and I again speak, I was then the assistant editor of the Times of India, you couldn't write on what was happening in India. So I instantly became an expert in the politics of Argentina. Now you might say, why Argentina? It's because there was a lady dictator who ran the show in Argentina, and I wrote about how her dictatorship functioned. Until, in good old Sarkari style, I was summoned and said, why are you becoming a specialist in Argentina? I said, because I can't be a specialist in India. And that didn't convince him. But the fact is that people chose various ways to defy censorship during that period of the emergency. But since then, of course, we've had a constant friction between those who are in the seat of politics and those who are involved in various cultural activities. In addition, therefore, to the politics of it, we also have, as my example told you earlier, the question of the market. The market also imposes its own laws. And the laws of the market de facto mean that they are in it to make money. And if they are in it to make money, then as a rule, in principle, they've got to appeal to the largest number of people possible. And therefore, there is inevitably, at least in the initial stages of the market, a dumbing down that goes on. And you find this dumbing down across the cultural field in our country. I'll give you just a couple of examples. There is no classic that will survive, I think, of any films made in Bollywood over the past 10 years. If you tune into our radio today, you'll find that more than 80% of the music that you hear is the film music, is the music of the late 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, what explains that? Well, one explanation is you no longer have the kind of lyric writers that you had in that period. If you take a lyric writer like Sahir Ludhianvi, there was a certain uplifting thing about that lyric. But then you suddenly come across a lyric which begins 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that kind of thing. So there is that shift that has taken place. What I'm saying is there is therefore the inevitable dumbing down process that has taken place, and of course it has affected media as well. But then, of course, there is another side to the market which I think needs to be taken into account, because the market is very flexible. If the market knows that there is a newer kind of a consumer that is coming forth, then the market will seek to adjust. This is not what the state of politics does. The state of politics finds it extremely difficult to adjust to newer demands of the audience. And my friend Jawhar Sarkar should know, because he's currently having a raging debate with a very nice and articulate gentleman whom you see on the screen, a certain Manish Tiwari, who happens to be his minister. So the fact is that the state per se finds it very difficult to adjust to new realities. The market is much, much better placed to do so. However, and this is where I think I'm going to end, there is a third force, a third element that has emerged in our society in the past few years, and which is even more dangerous than the state and even more dangerous than the market. And that force, I would say, is called the so-called cultural police. This cultural police, for ideological ends, will not allow women to dress the way women want, will not allow young people to celebrate festivals the way young people want. These are people who will go and burn down an exhibition of paintings because they are not, they're angry or they're upset with what is depicted in the paintings. So this kind of moral policing is a terrible menace. And I can tell you that this menace is increasing everywhere, because suddenly you find that there are institutions which are so afraid of these moral policing that they will simply cancel programs because they don't want any disruptions in the hall. The good thing, therefore, is you now find that the same young people who have been targets of this moral policing are now fighting back, are hitting back. And I think one way of hitting back is, and I shall end there, is this extraordinary upsurge of emotion that came through after the Supreme Court's terrible ruling on gay rights. I think the largest and the most eloquent backlash against that particular judgment has come from young people. And I think, therefore, that is the hope. So these three, I think we'll have to be very critically examine all of them. I began with a story about Prague. I'm going to end it with a similar story, but this one is something I didn't experience myself, but which I read, and which again is quite relevant to both our politics and to our culture. This anecdote is taken from a play written by a British playwright, Tom Stoppard. And in that play, a reporter goes to a developing country where a coup has just happened. And the coup maker, a general who has declared himself to be the president, receives a British reporter, and the British reporter says, "Well, sir, is the press in your country free?" And the dictator pauses for a while and says, "Well, it is relatively free. That is to say, it is owned by my relatives." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Padgaonkar. That was very good. Now, I do have to inform our audience there's a slight adaptation to our program in terms of timing. So I hope you will bear with me as we improvise the next few minutes here. We will have one paper presenter who will present, is it a he or a she? His paper, Dr. Ishwar Anand, who is to present his paper in a few minutes. Then I would like to request the panel members whether they would accept a brief panel discussion on the issues which are raised. I'll make my closing remarks, and we will felicitate all of you here, and then inshallah things will fall into place. The basic problem is we have the President of Afghanistan coming, speaking here at 11:30. By 11, we cannot leave this room. Once you are in, you're stuck. So please stay there. No tea. We are going to try and keep you as intellectually occupied as we can. So can I ask Mr. Ishwar Anand, if he is present, to come and make his presentation? A brief presentation, please.
Esteemed Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh, Dr. Dilip Padgaonkar, Mr. Siddharth Vadrajan, Mr. Jawahar Sarkar, Mr. Pawan Verma, esteemed Dr. Rajni Gupte, distinguished invitees and friends. At the very outset, I would like to thank Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh for having given me an opportunity to speak. I was just told a few minutes back that there will be no author presentation, but then I'm very happy that somehow you could squeeze in my presentation. Well, development journalism as a subject has been engaging my attention for quite some time, for well over 3 decades. As a freelancer, when I used to do articles on development, when I used to do articles for the Statesman and the Hindustan Times in the late 80s, as a freelancer, as a research scholar, when I was doing my MPhil and PhD from Barahimpur University, Odisha, as a journalist, I worked in 3 newspapers, the Indian Express Bangalore, the Deccan Herald, and the Tribune in Chandigarh for well over 24 years. And just in the last 2.5 years, as an academic, when I joined the Symbiosis International University as the Professor of Journalism and Media Studies. Institutionally speaking, in the last 2 years or so, we have been practicing development journalism in letter and spirit. We have the Rural Survey Project spearheaded by Dr. Dilip Padgaonkar as part of our R.K. Lakshman Chair initiatives. We have done excellent work. See, we do organize seminars, we do deliver lectures, we do write papers. But it is here, when you do rural survey projects, that our students are trained how to do development surveys, how to do pieces of research in rural areas. I remember last year, when the debate just started in the media about the cash transfers, now it has become direct benefit transfers. They have just broad-based the project. Direct benefit transfers, DBT. Our students and faculty visited a few villages in Satara. So they knew what are the ground realities. They interviewed many people, villagers. It is from villages that we get the actual inputs, not from our air-conditioned chambers. So we got to know so much information. Even the village panchayat and others, they used to tell us that, why are banks not being made accessible to villagers? How can this cash transfer scheme succeed when banks are not accessible to us? Why can't, these banks are located? And then again, there is another problem. People are saying that it's so difficult for them to get Aadhaar numbers, Aadhaar cards. And again, opening a bank account, even in Delhi it's difficult. What to speak of remote, nooks and corners of our villages in the countryside. Even opening a bank account is so powerful. My point here is, I think development journalism has got tremendous potential to develop partnerships, to help. Yesterday, Ambassador Sham Sharan, Ambassador Ronin Sen, Ambassador G. Parthasarathi, and many others, they have described how India has been helping in various facets of rural development, especially our South Asian countries, Nepal, Bhutan, Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a glaring example as to how even we are giving high vitamin biscuits to the people of Afghanistan. But then, the whole problem is development journalism can help in development partnerships, effective development partnerships. But then I think the very mindset in the Indian media needs to change. Because most unfortunately, development journalism is not being given attention, the due attention it deserves. I can tell you one example. I'm very recently, I think October last week, I had the opportunity of visiting South Africa, Cape Town. I was stationed in Cape Town. There was a huge, strike by slum dwellers. Slums, the very word slums, it is a derogatory word. It is a derogatory word in South Africa. They call it informal human settlements. This strike was there. When was it? October 30th. And October 31st, out of curiosity, I went through all the newspapers in editions of Johannesburg, Cape Town, Nadar, all this. And they displayed it on page 1 with photos. And you don't find that kind of culture here. Because if I get a development story or even slum dweller strike, I will just bury it in Express Newsline or some local supplement. But it can never find a place in the main edition. I think this culture needs to change. The very mindset of news editors, associate editors, resident editors is that if the reporter goes, of course, after due clearance, if the reporter has got a very good story, development story, unless there is a corruption angle to it, unless there is a political element to it, I will not carry it. I will just say, I will just spike it for use on a lean day. I think this culture needs to change. Pura, I have done 7 case studies for this presentation. Yeah. Yes.
A panel discussion?
Yes.
Excuse me, can you just conclude?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I have done 7 case studies. I don't want to elucidate all these case studies. Only one example I will take. Pura, for instance, providing urban amenities in rural areas. It is because of the former President APJ Abdul Kalam's personal initiative that lot of work was done, but we have only one successful model, that is in Coimbatore. Okay. The plan is to ensure integrated and comprehensive development of all the 6,20,000 villages. But where is this development? We hardly have any example. I think Loni, one pilot study was done in Maharashtra, Punjab, Rajasthan, about 5 states, pilot studies was done. But beyond that, nothing is happening. And why is the media not doing stories, not doing development stories? Corruption is one thing.
I'm sorry, Mr. Raman, I really have to stop you there.
So I would request you, I would humbly, I would like to submit that development journalism needs to be given its due place in the overall scheme of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. As I told you, what we will try and do here, let me go and stand there. This is so that I can see my panel. We'll try and have a panel discussion on these subjects. And I'd like to put a little framework for the discussion. We had Pavan Verma speaking about culture as a product. You have culture as one aspect of culture. You've had Siddharth Varadarajan, Siddharth Varadarajan speaking of it as a medium. Both Jawahar Sarkar and Siddharth spoke of culture as a medium of communication. We had Pavan Verma and Dr. Amin speaking of culture as a product. And we had Dilip Padgaonkar speaking of the culture as the context for development partnerships. Now, if this particular thing is understandable, you've got a product, you start backwards. You have development partnerships between India and countries in Asia and Africa. These are, let's say, specific projects. Now, if you are going to deal with culture as a product, then culture becomes a part of the interchange with the same objective as even, let us say, building a factory. You then have culture as a medium to attain that objective, where it's not necessarily as a product, but it's a medium through which you try and attain your foreign policy goals. And finally, you have the context. You send an Indian doctor to Zambia, and he has to learn what Zambian culture is if he is going to get his patients to trust him or his students to trust him, and bring that back. So it is an interchange. That is the context that I was mentioning. Now, within this, let me raise this one question I asked. You're free to raise whatever questions you want, but one question I would like to put to the panel. Could different cultures cause more misunderstandings, which they normally do in this world, or how will you make it lead towards understanding? Dilip.
Well, first of all, what I'd like to do is be a little more precise about the definition of the word development. Because the word development, if it relates really to sending doctors, building schools, and so on and so forth, of course, that's all very important activity. But for me, the development that I have in mind is precisely a development in the minds of people, a questioning of authority, a skepticism about accepted rules. That is something which, for me, is development. A greater awareness of responsibilities is also development. And unless that base is created in the minds of people, I think the rest would be a little more mechanical than always. Secondly, I refer to what Pavan has said. I think, of course, we've got a fantastic culture, but that culture has never been static. And I think if there is use to be put, quote unquote, of culture, particularly in development, it is once again culture as the place where ideas are debated, new forms are experimented, new questions are raised. I think it is this churning process within India is, in my view, the finest expression of culture. It is not something static. It is the questioning, it's the churning process, which I think I'm going to emphasize.
It's very interesting. I'm going to give the floor to Pavan because he's immediately responded to this. But I do want to emphasize, we are talking about culture in a particular context that is of international relations in this conference. I'd like to keep it there. So would you like, for example, Greenpeace, or do you like Greenpeace, because they're doing it, or any other organizations, coming here and telling your young people how to question authority, or would you rather treat your young people? So when your people go out to another country, should they go and try and raise awareness of the injustices in that particular system? Or would you leave that to themselves? This is, I'd really, really request you to stay within the context of international relations. Otherwise, we are going to get stuck in navel gazing a bit. Pavan.
No, first, I just want to say, Ambassador Ghosh, that when I spoke of culture as a product, even within the framework you have defined, I didn't mean it as a commodity. I used it as a metaphor that if you are going to use culture as another instrument within the framework of diplomacy, there must be a product which can be a source of attraction. The original definition of soft power was that you have something which attracts people to your way of life, your culture, your values, your creativity, etc. That is something which nations must have, or at least must continue to evolve with. The former Minister Dr. Amin said that, for instance, the diversity and plurality of India is something which is relevant to them when they see what they are going through themselves. Then that becomes one component of that overall cultural milieu which we must preserve, because if we don't, then there is something lost. On the question of whether cultures can create conflict, certainly they can, because if a culture is sought to be imposed by measures other than the normal osmosis or interaction that allows cultures to influence each other, the imposition aspect is something we have to be careful. I think that is very important.
If there's anybody in the audience who has a particularly pertinent comment or to make, or a question to ask, I would welcome that. Yes, madam. Third line here.
First of all, I congratulate the chair for doing a very dynamic job. As far as your question on cultural ideas in international transfer of political relations or a particular operation of education is concerned, involvement of Greenpeace in creating a public opinion or debating in the public forum the implementation of international norm or relevance of international norms. Symbiosis students have been engaged in discussing the relevance of a lot of these new legislations which are coming up in the area of biotechnology, for example. It could be the issue of field trials of genetically modified organisms, or it could be the issue of non-regulation of biotechnology towards the end of public well-being. So we have generated these debates, and we have written a letter to the Prime Minister endorsing with the opinions of the students and those who are engaged in the debate from different disciplines of the university, say biomedical sciences or law or liberal arts. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's very interesting. Yes, I've got Dr. Amin and then Johar.
Thank you indeed. I personally think that we should, as human beings, sow the seeds of a culture which is the culture of, as we say in our Kurdish proverbs, that the world is a rose, smell it and pass it to your next. And if you are not a rose, please do not be a thorn. So when you talk about Greenpeace or when we talk about atrocities, uprooted, wars, conflicts, etc., we shouldn't hide ourselves behind our borders in the name of nobody should interfere in our internal affairs. If interference is in a positive way, while we have signed conventions, international conventions, treaties, which limit our sovereignty, then let it be. Otherwise, these international conventions and international human rights principles, treaties that are regionally and internationally bounded, which has a superiority over national laws, then it becomes meaningless. But let me come to culture. There are different types of culture. There's a fascist culture, there's a democratic culture, there's an inclusionist type of culture, and there's an exclusionist type of culture which marginalize people and which leads to conflicts and which does not embrace the diversity that we mentioned, which is the source of many wars and conflicts around the world. And there are a denial culture, a man-chauvinist culture towards women, and there are also cultures of those who have colonial backgrounds and they think that they are superior, and culture of imperialistic background and culture of nations who are thinking that they are bigger and they are stronger and others are smaller, they are minorities and they have to be oppressed. Or they deny their cultural rights, linguistic rights, etc. So I would say that what is most important, that we work for an inclusionist type of culture. For example, my wife has a most dynamic, Safiya Al-Suhail, a member of the parliament, the most dynamic cultural salon in Baghdad. It's a tradition that we have had which went through Andalusia to Europe and came back in forms of coffee shops, literary salons, and for the first time, she opened up the cultural salon in Iraq, in a Muslim country, to women. So it shouldn't be just dominated by men. And to all ethnic groups, that they should be present, and to all diplomats, and promoting cultural exchange with various people, including we invited a film director who did a film by the name Shanghai, and trying to promote cultural exchange with other nations. We did it with the La Comédie Française, with the various other countries, artists, opera singers from Italy. And this brings us closer to each other as people, as nation. There are positive things that we can do with culture and to turn it to an instrument of peace, of promoting dialogue, friendship, love, rather than communicating with each other with hatred, with this machinery of hatred, this industry of hatred that exists in our world, that the president of the university here talked about discrimination, about exclusion, about marginalization, even among international students that he has seen. And this is a global phenomenon. We see all kinds of phobias that exist towards religions, ethnicities around the world. And this has to come to an end. We had your great poet, Tagore, I hope that I'm pronouncing it correctly. He came in 1931 to Iraq. And he stayed also, he visited Safiya's family, and he was hosted by the Iraqi Writers Union, and he came to promote dialogue and peace and to tell Iraqis and other Muslim countries to talk to your Muslims brothers in my country, in India, to promote this dialogue and harmony between religions and between groups. This is beautiful, and we should continue this way. And many of our Sufi poets, from Hassan al-Basri to many others who hosted some of your gurus in Basra and influenced the thinking here in your country. And your country was an inspiration source for our Sufi orders, from the Naqshbandiya order. Maulana Khalid came to this country, and we have the Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Gailani, and your people comes and visits, and this is what we need. And more exchange, more dialogue, more peace, promote beautiful things rather than nasty hatred that is going around. Thank you.
the point is that culture can promote both, can promote hatred and can promote understanding and love and peace. How do you ensure it is operated in the second way? So I think that is your problem. You're dealing with human beings. Human beings are not idealistically perfect things. Johor.
Ma'am, you had two questions, distinct. One was on developmental journalism. The other was on the use of culture.
Development and journalism. Anyway,
okay.
Please go ahead.
Development would refer to the corners of the cupboard that the room never sweeps and pointing them out in whether through journalism or through economic upliftment. The question that you would ask is whether we or anyone else would like foreigners or foreign scholars to come or journalists to come and tell us what's wrong. Well, factually, we have no objection. Because if you recall the history of India, Annie Besant wasn't a foreigner, wasn't an Indian. Neither was Sister Nivedita. You have to have empathy for the country that you're going and pointing out. That's one. Second, right now we have Jean Drèze going around with his jhola, while Amartya Sen is all over the world. He's the one who's pointing out. So we have nothing against somebody.
He's Indian. Anyway.
He's there. Anyway, so Jean Drèze is as much an Indian in pointing out to India's ills. What I object to, and this is what I noticed for the last 4 years that I was Culture Secretary, was that it was mandatory for a foreign visitor to visit either Taj or Humayun's tomb if he had no time, and the next mandate was to visit a slum and embrace little children. There was a metaphor in it, there was a subtext in it, that whatever you guys talk about your greatness, you have this and we're pointing it out to the whole world. These are subtexts nobody likes. Coming on culture, as Pawan and I and many of us would agree, is a very sticky subject. It's like chewing gum, bubble gum, you can blow it up and then it messes around. Well, I was coming back with a high-level conference, high-level team that had gone to Russia to negotiate on tanks and this and that. At the end of it, when I asked my taxi driver what he felt, he said he hadn't heard why he had come. I said, what is your first impression about India? He said, Mera naam Joka. So what they remember is the lowest denominator. And we shouldn't shy away from projecting the denominator of Hindi films, Hindi film music and others as, let us say, one of the ambassadors of Indian culture. Our personal aesthetics do not matter. What matters is mass popularity. I asked another gathering in Central Asia, after an erudite lecture on culture, I asked, is there anything that they would like from India? They said, Shah Rukh Khan. That's it. So that ends the debate on this call.
No, that's a very, very good point, because I have faced this in the wilds of Samarkand with the names of actors whom I've never even heard of. But I think you're right. We do not bring a judgment on what people like. But I was not talking about foreigners to India, but when Indians are foreigners in another country, how should we behave? Should we then do what Dilip was suggesting, raise the awareness of the people against the injustices in their system? Why not? This is where the understanding the culture of that country comes in. I'm trying to emphasize that Siddharth mentioned that there's very little published in our print media, almost next to nothing in our electronic media, very, very little on international affairs, on other countries, except for the United States, and that is all gossip of some weird kind. A little bit about China, more about Pakistan, which is negative, and that's it. What about the 190 odd countries around the world and countries in which we operate? Our development programs operate there. So that is there. We are ignorant. How do we learn about these countries? This is the issue. Can I hear something from the people here? I see some foreign young people, some not so foreign young people. No. I can't see. Ah, yes. Go ahead. Yeah, right here. Yeah.
I'm Ved Srinivas, Assistant Professor in SIMC Bangalore. The context here was the coverage of world news in Indian newspapers. So my point was that, around 24 pages is, I think, the average of national daily in English. States, districts, and all the issues taken together. I think 1 or 2 pages are given to world. So my point is, can't we have like Delhi Times or Mumbai Times we have? Can't we have a separate issue of World Times or something like that, at least on a Saturday or Sunday, so that 16-20 pages are dedicated to cover, if not 190
Would you read that if there were?
Definitely, I am looking forward to it.
Would others be interested? Because they've got to look at commercial interests.
Why not? At least once a week, let us introduce that. 16-20 pages of pure world affairs. It's a suggestion, maybe well taken, maybe contested, but it's open to it.
Siddharth?
If I can...
Siddharth, I'm giving him the floor. And then I'll just pass it on.
It's a direct answer to that suggestion, that's what I'm saying. There is already something on.
Okay.
No, very quickly.
Dilip, let Siddharth speak. Then I'll give it to you, and then I'll give it to Pawan.
The part of the problem is the revenue model that the Indian newspaper industry follows, which is to sell at a very low cover price and recover the money through advertising. So you have a 24-page paper that sells for say 3 rupees or 3 rupees 50, when it costs about 15 rupees to print and distribute, not counting the salaries and overhead of journalists and other staff. I think we need to move the kind of supplement that you're talking about would be entirely possible if we were to move to a model where readers pay a bit more. And I think, for example, for a 16-page supplement, which comes out once a week, if we were to ask interested readers to pay 10 rupees extra for that, in the monthly expenditure, it's not a lot for those who are, interested in world affairs. But I think that this is something that, can only work if the revenue model is.
Dilip?
I just want to directly answer that suggestion which was made. There already exists an online magazine published by the Symbiosis Institute of International Studies called irgamag.com. IRGA stands for Indian Review of Global Affairs. irga.com. It is free. So you can access it if you're interested in world affairs. You get not only the latest developments in world affairs, but you also get analyses done by some of the finest experts on the subject, which are on our board. So you don't therefore need to go for a print edition necessarily, because a lot of people increasingly want go online for these things. So that exists. And since I have the floor, very quickly in 30 seconds, when I said, should any Indian going abroad, should he engage in a highlighting injustice and so on? No. I think the first duty of an Indian who goes and lives abroad is to try and understand that culture, that society, that language, before being tempted by any kind of activism. In fact, the best that you can do is to study also what the activists in those countries do and step there. But the minute you begin any kind of activism yourself, without actually coming to grips with that, and you as ambassador are fully aware of it, there are Indians who stay abroad for years and don't pick up the language of the place, let alone the culture of the place. So that's what I meant.
Pawan?
Now, just quickly to respond, because I presume this is also a discussion to what Jawahar said. I want to clarify, I have nothing against Shah Rukh Khan. But I only want to make the point that if in addition to that, Ambassador, we could also have one university in the top 20 in the world. If in addition to that, we could also have a world-class gallery of modern art. If in addition to that, if we also had a world-class theatre repertory. If in addition to that, we had a better hall than City Fort, which when foreigners come to the capital of India, they go back almost from the gate. That is my point. One artist in China, modern artist, earns more than all the Indian artists put together in 1 year. We celebrate one painting sold for $1 million. The point I'm making is, if you want to be a robust cultural nation without any form of xenophobia or chauvinism, your cultural creativity must be more than the lowest common denominator. I suspect that Mr. Jawahar Sarkar learnt in Central Asia what they want is Shah Rukh Khan, because they don't know anything else about Indian culture anymore. That's the point.
I'm not about to mediate in what is the unmediatable. But let me tell you that there are people in our country and people abroad who like Shah Rukh Khan, and there are people in our country and abroad who like Shah Rukh Khan plus whatever. So there are different audiences to which India should... No, just I think I've got somebody here. Just 1 second. I have to say that if people want, for reasons which shall remain unmentionable, leave the room, once you come back, that is it. So you will have to please settle down and be prepared to settle down, listen to President Karzai, wait till he leaves, and then you can leave. Is that all right? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning.
Could you introduce yourself? So that would be interesting.
Yes, I'm Jean Shurinda. I'm working for Mozambique Embassy. I'm based in Delhi. And I'm finding very interesting the discussion about culture. And culture and diplomacy, and culture and the partnership development. My perception for the 3 years has been in Delhi is that the Indians, they know more about the Indian diaspora in US. So I'm very happy that at least Symbiosis is discussing something deeper about Africa. Because you might be surprised, but many of our eldest brothers, they've grown up watching movies of Amitabh Bachchan, Emma Malik, Dharmendra. You know, we have a strong Indian influence in Africa. And one of the languages is Gujarat. They speak in my country, Mozambique. But my question is that somehow India was not able to take that influence in Africa to transfer and to develop a strong partnership. What you see today, you see countries with a very strong partnership with us, which they don't have any cultural linkage with us, from Asia, from other countries. So I want to ask Ambassador Verma, how can we, because we don't have to invite Indians. Indians are a part of our society, but other countries, we have to invite them.
Okay, I've got, I take two more comments / questions from the floor before I come back to the panel for the final round. There is one point I'd like to make in response to what Pawan said. If India had a higher growth rate, you would find an appreciation of Indian culture as well. I mean, let me just leave it there. If you maintained for 30 years a 10% growth rate, you would see your painters painting, selling, your universities coming up on top. I mean, this is a rankings issue. Yes, sir.
Hello, may I speak in between? By the time he gets the mic, please. Here, in this corner, ma'am. The press.
Oh, wait a minute, he's just got the mic.
Okay.
I'll give you the floor after this.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
All right.
I'm Habib Wardak. I'm from Afghanistan, and I'm a postgraduate student of Defense and Strategic Studies in Pune. We all know that India is trying to emerge. It is emerging as not just a regional player, but as a global player in the world. But it is very heartbreaking when we all know that just maybe a quarter of a page or two about international relations, about international affairs in Indian newspapers. And the general population should know if they are to contribute in the formulation of foreign policy, because their opinion is very important. So how do they get to know when they don't have any opinion at all? That is number one. I come from a country where literacy rate is just not maybe more than 20%, but majority of the Afghan population knows much more than the Indian population who has undergraduate degrees when it comes to international affairs and international relations, because everybody listens to at least 3 to 4 radio stations that talks about international affairs. If you ask an Indian undergraduate student who is, for example, Vladimir Putin and who is Medvedev, they don't know who they are. They know who Putin is, but they don't know who Medvedev is. But in Afghanistan, they know which job is assigned to which one. For example, the American kids, for them, the state level would be the county level, the national level would be the state level, and international would be interstate amongst the United States of America. But there are so many countries in the world, maybe in Africa, that they have much more knowledge in terms of international affairs than the ones who have developed quite far. So if the general population has to have an opinion in the formulation of foreign policy, they have to know. How do we do that? Except maybe adding 2 to 3, 4, 5 pages into the newspaper, or how?
Okay. Yes, the young lady here.
Yeah. I'm Jyotsna Ketkar, working in Prasar Bharati, that is All India Radio Pune. And my question is that, what do you think is the role of youth exchange program in developing and strengthening cultural bonds between countries worldwide?
Okay. Now, I think I am coming to the end of my generosity with time. Somebody else? Whoever it is. Yes, please. Last, in that corner there. Can you have the mic, please?
I salute Your Excellencies. I'm Simon Kwan Kir Kwan from the Republic of South Sudan, the General Secretary of Symbiosis International Student Council. I grew up in Nairobi, and Nairobi, actually Kenya is dominated by Indian multinationals, and the ones who are actually running the Kenyan economy. But now my point is, when it comes to culture, the Indians and the Kenyans are really very diverse. In religion too, they are very diverse. But my biggest question is, if the Indians are running the Kenyan economy, why don't they interact with the Kenyans themselves? Because Indian student in Nairobi goes to their own school. They don't go even to African schools. You see, so there is a lot of exclusiveness, more than inclusiveness, for the Indians who are actually the biggest economic players in Africa. Why is that so? Thank you very much.
It's a good question. Before I ask the panel to answer these questions and comments, I would like to say that these Indians in Kenya, are they Kenyan or are they Indians? Are they Kenyans of Indian origin, or are they Indian citizens? Indian citizens. Okay, all right, Indian citizens. No, this is just some intellectual. Yeah. I'll ask the panel.
First question was raised here about why, with certain inherent and natural advantages, we have not been able to convert that in Africa, for instance, to other aspects of success, including economic. I think the answer is very clear. From the beginning, there was a danger that the concept of soft power, because it was evolved in the United States, which took its cultural calling card far too seriously. As Ambassador Ghosh said, it was accompanied by high economic growth, a worldwide global military presence, and then it thought that one of the best ways to give a mask to this is to call it the soft power of the United States. I'm not saying that was the only reason. So the ability of culture on its own to be able to play a role was somewhat hyped in the theories and discussions at the time when the concept came out. Actually, the truth is, culture on its own is not going to deliver unless it's part of that seamless composite web of diplomacy which has economic power, military power, political power, and a range of other attributes.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid the convoy is about to reach. So may I request those who have asked questions, I deeply regret this, to catch the panelists who are, please do not run away, so that they can respond on a one-to-one basis to whatever issues have been raised. I would like to wrap up this particular session and start with thanking the Symbiosis International University. It is not only a beautiful university, but this particular session, I think, has illustrated what the word symbiosis means. And I think that what was meant when this university was established is what we were trying to discuss here today, is how do we start understanding each other. We are different, but different peoples can understand and should be able to live together to build something which is worth having. So I'd like to thank from the bottom of my heart the Vice Chancellor for being here and the university, and we have got, dare I say, an old friend, Mr. Devare, and of course Mr. Padgaonkar, people from this university who have made this particular session and this conference so important. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really honored. I'll close this session and request you once again, please do not now move.
Thank you, ma'am, for conducting the session. May I now request Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh to kindly felicitate the dignitaries on the dais. May I request Dr. Rajni Gupte, Vice Chancellor, Symbiosis International University, to kindly felicitate Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh. Thank you, ma'am.